We'll begin our forum with opening statements from the candidates in response to the following question. At the heart of Catholic social teaching is the idea of the common good. The common good is the sum total of social conditions which allow people, either as groups or as individuals, to reach their fulfillment more fully and more easily. In your party's view, what are the most important issues that need to be addressed for the common good of Canadians today?
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I became a Catholic as a young adult at a time when I was a student and already active in politics. And one of the things that really opened the door to my own Catholic journey was reading Centesimus Annus, the great social teaching encyclical. This text really captures the essence of good politics at the service of a common good. St. John Paul II defined that good politics as being founded on two key ideas: solidarity and subsidiarity. Solidarity is the idea that we should care about the well-being of all, not just attending to our own interests or looking out for people like us, but attending to the well-being of all, particularly the most vulnerable. Subsidiarity is the idea that decision-making and control should be left as close to the ground as possible. Better the city than the province, better the province than a national government, and also that strong individuals, families, and communities have certain natural competencies. The state should not tread on these competencies unless absolutely necessary. Solidarity works best when realized in a context of subsidiarity and of the associated commitment to human freedom. People voluntarily seeking the good of others rather than being compelled to act by the state. A state that is powerful enough to control our every action may also compel us to act in ways that are contrary to the common good. St. John Paul II wrote that the state should seek to advance the common good through both direct and indirect action, taking into consideration solidarity and subsidiarity. Quote, indirectly and according to the principle of subsidiarity by creating favorable conditions for the free exercise of economic activity, which will lead to abundant opportunities for employment and sources of wealth. Directly and according to the principles of solidarity by defending the weakest, by placing certain limits on the autonomy of the parties who determine working conditions, and by ensuring in every case the necessary minimum support for the unemployed worker. Now, if I look at politics today, I think we see some voices on the far right who want subsidiarity without solidarity. And then we have the parties at the left who advance a philosophy of solidarity without subsidiarity. To every problem or threat to the common good that they perceive, higher taxes and more federal government involvement is presented as the solution, often at the expense of human freedom. In contrast to these alternatives, the modern Conservative Party has a detailed platform, which you can find at conservative.ca/plan. It builds on the best of our record, but also contains many new ideas. It is explicitly rooted in an effort to balance and incorporate both solidarity and subsidiarity, looking out for the most vulnerable while respecting freedom, autonomy, and conscience, and advancing towards the common good. We have also seen how the big government philosophy of the left, running up more debt in the last 6 years than in the country's entire prior history, is a failure even of solidarity. It is failure to consider the costs of future debt, the burden that they will impose on future generations, and the need to secure a viable future for our children and grandchildren. I think our plan does better than the alternatives to balance subsidiarity and solidarity and to advance the common good.
Well, first, Brendan, I want to thank you for this conversation. It's really important. And I will let your viewers know that I have actually taken notes, and I'm going to refer to my notes throughout this conversation because I think it's really important for Catholics to know what we have done as a government and what we are planning to do as we move forward. So thank you for this wonderful opportunity today. And so I begin by saying that, look, the world has changed enormously in the last 30 years. The rise of social digital media changed the way we live and work. Global warming has led to rising sea levels, droughts, and wildfires. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected our health systems, highlighted the importance of essential workers, and accelerated existing trends toward remote work, and brought to light inequalities in our society. So these facts are what have led to the four fundamental issues rising to the fore in this election. Assuring that all Canadians can have a secure, well-maintained, affordable housing. Facing the challenges of climate change in a way that not only meets climate targets, but also creates new economic opportunities and greater prosperity. The creation of good, secure jobs, as well as the supports for Canadians to take up those jobs in a rapidly evolving job market. And then finally, stronger healthcare. And our government has taken action, and we're going to continue to take action on each of these areas. In fact, these are the focus of our platform. It is the Liberal government's belief that policy must both reflect the values we hold dear as a country, as well as providing supports necessary to help people reach their full potential. If each and every one of us can flourish and reach our full potential, think of the rich benefit that this will produce for each of us and for everyone. I have witnessed this firsthand in my time as serving as a high school chaplain. I saw many students who faced barriers through no fault of their own. And you know, when those barriers were eliminated, what did you see? You saw human flourishing. You saw youth fully realizing their potential. Everyone benefited from this. So we recognize this as a government. As we move forward, we will do all we can to enable Canadians to flourish.
Thank you very much for the question. And I just want to touch on the fact that Catholic social justice teachings really made me into the person I am today, who advocates for the marginalized and those who don't have a voice. So in terms of the most important issues to me and the NDP, I'm going to touch on three. So that would be housing, affordability, and climate change. The housing crisis is the main reason why I decided to enter this election as a candidate. Housing is a human right, and it's time that we start to create policies with housing every person in mind. Even Jesus' birth was affected by some sort of a housing shortage. It became a beautiful part of the story of the birth of Jesus, but it also highlights to me how people without housing can be put in extremely vulnerable situations. Over the past 6 years, the right kind of housing has become more difficult to secure for everyone. We must take care of people in encampments who are expressing their human right for housing, renters who are struggling to make ends meet each month, and those who are looking to purchase their first home, and those looking to move into a larger home to support starting a family. The ability to secure housing that works for a family has a direct effect on whether people choose to start a family. We must ensure that couples can secure housing that will support them starting a family and bringing new life into this world. We'll do that by removing corporate buyers from the market, supporting renters, and building 250,000 affordable homes within the next 5 years. You should, in my mind, only be bidding against other people who are looking for a roof over their head, and the NDP will work to ensure that. Along the lines of affordability, life has become harder and harder for ordinary Canadians to afford. Childcare, when you can get it, is prohibitively expensive, and internet and cell phone bills continue to go up year after year, and the costs of medicine are only going up. We must ensure that Canadians can afford to live in their home city or town, and focus on those who are struggling as we try to build back better and with equity after this pandemic. Affordable childcare needs to be in place immediately to ensure women can continue their careers today, not years from now. This is how we build back better with equity. On climate change, simply put, we don't have time. Our planet's climate is changing in dangerous ways, with forest fires now becoming the new norm in Canada, both in BC and Ontario. These fires are affecting air quality across our country to the point where exercising outside is not recommended on certain days. Canada's emissions have increased every year over the past 5 years. We simply aren't doing enough, and we're running out of time. The current government has bought a pipeline and is saying the revenue of that pipeline is necessary to fight climate change. The concept that we must pollute in order to combat climate change is utterly incompatible. We need to transition now to cleaner energy, net zero buildings, and do everything we can to fight the climate change crisis, because we simply don't have time. Thank you.
Question 1 is on life and dignity of the human person. Catholics believe that at the moment we are conceived, we have been made in the image and likeness of God. It is from this likeness that all of our dignity is derived. Each of us is an incomparable, irreplaceable, unique child of God, and as such, we are each imbued with an inherent and inviolable dignity. We increase this likeness and our own dignity throughout our whole lives by seeking to grow closer to God with each moment of our being. Thus, the dignity of all human life must be respected across the entirety of a person's natural life, from conception to youth, to adulthood and professional life, through to their elderly years and the end of their life. What are your party's views on the purpose and the dignity of human life, and how do those views shape your party's platform?
Speaking on behalf of the Conservative Party, I can say that we are the only one of the major political parties in Canada which even allows its representatives to hold the views that you have just described. Our party is obviously not monolithically pro-life, and nor is it monolithically pro-choice. It does not prescribe one position on any of the major contentious moral questions, but it respects diversity of thought on them. In that sense, we are very different from the other major parties. For Liberals, New Democrats, and Greens, there is no choice but pro-choice. Liberals and New Democrats have attacked us for our efforts to defend freedom of conscience for legislators and healthcare practitioners. Our party creates a space for and defends spaces for those who have pro-life convictions against the no choice but pro-choice mentality of the other parties. We have defended conscience rights for MPs and healthcare practitioners, opposed Liberal efforts to attach a pro-choice values test to summer jobs funding, and stood up for the contribution that people of faith and conscience make in healthcare and other fields. There are also a number of critical ways that our platform advances the well-being of the most vulnerable. Our platform, available at conservative.ca/plan, commits on page 48 to the creation of a national adoption strategy, promoting adoption and reducing expenses for those participating in it. The platform also commits to expanding child benefit and starting to provide child benefit in the 7th month of pregnancy. In addition to protecting conscience, defending freedom of speech on university campuses and on the internet, and protecting the right of Catholic and other institutions to be true to their founding mission, our platform proposes significant reforms to the current euthanasia regime. Conservatives would restore the 10-day reflection period, restore the requirement for 2 fully independent witnesses, and require that anyone approving a euthanasia request receive training on how to apply the law and actually examine their patient. These things all seem fairly basic, but they are important safeguards that will protect vulnerable people from being pushed into euthanasia. We will repeal Liberal measures that allow those suffering from depression or other mental health challenges to access euthanasia. Those who are suffering from depression should be offered help and recovery, not a lethal injection. We will also require that any discussion about euthanasia only occur if the issue is raised by the patient. We have heard testimony from Canadians with disabilities having euthanasia repeatedly pushed on them, even being told that they are selfish for wanting to stay alive. This is wrong. Canadians with disabilities should be able to access healthcare without worrying about someone telling them that they are better off dead. That is why Conservatives will prevent anyone in a healthcare setting from bringing up euthanasia with a patient unless the patient raises the issue first. These safeguards were opposed by other parties in Parliament, but we believe that they are vitally necessary. The changes that we have proposed will advance the protection of life and conscience in Canada and are worthy of support.
We believe that each Canadian should have the conditions for success and lead a life where they are treated with dignity and respect. And our government has taken steps towards achieving this. In 2016, for example, we introduced the Canada Child Benefit. This benefit lifted 435,000 children out of poverty. We also increased the guaranteed income supplement for the most vulnerable seniors. This increase assisted approximately 900,000 seniors in Canada. We also instituted a host of measures to help Canadians get through the COVID-19 pandemic. We supported families through the Canada Workers Benefit, which had a direct impact on 1 million Canadian workers. We instituted the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, referred to as CEWS, to help employers and employees keep the relationship strong as we waited for the pandemic to abate. We provided income supports for students as well as creating job opportunities. Whether it's access to affordable, safe, and well-maintained housing, a good, stable job, effective health care, or a clean, sustainable environment, our government has and will continue to take action. A big part of recognizing the dignity of the person is compensating them fairly. We invested $3 billion to enhance wages for workers, frontline workers in particular, and delivered $2 billion in order to ensure that workers had personal protective equipment they needed. As well, we invested $19 billion in a safe restart agreement to keep people healthy, well, and safe. We instituted a $15 federal minimum wage for federally regulated workers, and we provided vaccines to every Canadian. The dignity of seniors is fundamental importance to our government. We've invested $6 billion in home care and palliative care services so seniors can stay in their homes and receive the care in their communities for as long as possible. We've committed $29.8 million to advancing our government's palliative care strategy. We've announced an investment of $3 billion over 5 years to support provinces and territories, ensuring that long-term care facilities the standards are applied and made permanent, and we've provided one-time payments to assist seniors through COVID-19. Our platform commits to improving conditions in long-term care homes, as well as hiring 25,000 personal support workers and ensuring that they receive a salary of at least $25 an hour. We are also committing to 10 paid sick days for federally regulated workers. These are some of the measures that we have taken to preserve the dignity of Canadians across the lifespan, and we're going to continue to invest in the well-being, prosperity, and security of Canadians if re-elected.
So the NDP has always been the party focused on the most marginalized in our society. Every life is important and should be supported, and supported so that it can truly reach its full potential. And this kind of lends itself very well to our approach on families. So there are things we can do to encourage people to start a family and feel supported while doing it, including improving perinatal health. So it is a struggle. New parents should not struggle alone. They should feel supported before and after birth, so that they can feel confident in the decisions that they're making and feel confident and able to start a family. Couples right now in Canada, many of them feel that they can't afford to start a family. We must address issues of affordability, housing, and head-to-toe medicine so that couples feel confident that they can move forward and create new life, and that there's a social safety net around them should they falter. On the topic of reproductive health, the New Democrats believe in respecting people's rights to make decisions about their own bodies and their own lives. Many individuals who are seeking abortion services in Canada can't access them. Only 1 hospital in 6 currently offers abortion services, and some provinces refuse to cover the cost of surgical abortion. Lack of access is even worse for people in rural areas in the north. We believe that everyone deserves safe, accessible abortion and reproductive health care services, no matter where they live or how much money they make. It's not enough for elected officials to say that they won't reopen the abortion debate. We need leaders to take action to prove access to services and support families.
Question 2 is on reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous peoples. In recent months, Canadians have been dismayed at reports of the large numbers of unmarked graves on the sites of former residential schools, including schools operated by Catholic institutions. These findings have been particularly traumatic for Canada's Indigenous communities and peoples, who have long lived with the intergenerational trauma of their families' experiences at these institutions. In the wake of these findings, numerous churches in Canada have been vandalized or burned, including many that are home to Indigenous Catholics. These tragedies, heaped upon tragedies, remind us that the journey of reconciliation and justice is an arduous journey that requires contrition, action, and commitment. Canadian Catholics are committed to this journey. In the words of Archbishop Donald Boland to Catholics in the Archdiocese of Regina, may this be remembered as a time when we opened our eyes and our ears, when we acknowledged the sufferings of the past and responded to them with compassion, when we turned apologies into concrete initiatives and built relationships that would build a better future. How does your party propose to advance sincere, committed, and coordinated responses by all responsible institutions to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, with the good of Indigenous people in mind, and in particular, to address the many ongoing and unconscionable crises, such as elevated rates of suicide and substance abuse, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, a lack of proper drinking water, and the chronic underfunding of reserve schools?
Residential schools were a government policy which was generally administered through religious orders and other church-affiliated entities. This was a wrong policy, which denied the inherent dignity of Indigenous children, the rights of families when it comes to raising their own children, and the value and dignity of Indigenous cultures. All of those who participated in this policy, including church-affiliated groups, were wrong to do so and bear responsibility for atoning for the past and advancing reconciliation and justice in the present and future. There is increasing discussion in politics about what churches should do to advance reconciliation. I note the fact that all entities involved have apologized and that there is ongoing dialogue between Indigenous leaders in the Vatican about the role Pope Francis can play in advancing reconciliation. As a Catholic, I am watching these developments in sincere hope of progress, as I know are many Canadian Catholics and Indigenous Catholics in particular. The Vatican did not play a role in the policy of residential schools, which was a policy of the government administered by local religious entities. Indeed, residential schools were deeply contrary to the values of the Catholic Church, but I'm still hopeful that good will come from continuing dialogue between Indigenous leaders and the Pope. We should also not fail to notice the fact that when some politicians come under fire over their failure to respond to the ongoing challenges and injustices afflicting Indigenous peoples, they have often found it convenient to point the finger at churches rather than taking responsibility for their own inaction. The government has a responsibility to atone for the primary role it played and also to confront ongoing instances of injustice and inequality which fall squarely within its own areas of jurisdiction. Our Conservative plan involves putting more resources into investigation and education about grave sites, creating a national memorial to honor residential school survivors and victims, recognizing safe drinking water as a fundamental human right, and ending long-term boil water advisories, and placing a major emphasis on economic development and self-determination for Indigenous communities. For too long, structures of paternalism have been reinforced without support for the fundamental changes that will give Indigenous communities the opportunity to develop, prosper, create jobs, and shape their own future. It's time for a new approach. Conservatives will start this work by creating a Canadian Indigenous Opportunities Corporation that will directly support First Nations and Inuit organizations seeking to purchase an equity stake in major projects. We will provide an initial investment of $5 billion into this corporation. We will also provide critical support for training and apprenticeships, develop an Indigenous business mentorship program, expand rural broadband access, and set targets for government procurement from Indigenous businesses. Now, finally, the preamble to this question mentions acts of vandalism that have been targeting Catholics and other faith communities this summer. These attacks have hurt Indigenous people of faith as well as others and have been widely condemned by Indigenous leaders, even while too many politicians have stayed silent. There has always been a group of anti-Catholic extremists who will seize on anything to justify their desire to discredit and destroy. This is obviously not in the spirit of reconciliation. All politicians should clearly and strongly condemn any acts of violence or vandalism, regardless of the target and regardless of the presumed justification.
As Liberals, we believe that our government's most important relationship is with Indigenous peoples whose land Canada has been settled. In recognition of this, we have taken many actions to improve the relationship as well as the conditions in which Indigenous peoples live within Canada's borders. We released the National Action Plan on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls on June 3rd. We've committed $2.2 billion over 5 years to work towards ending racism, sexism, and ableism. We are at over 150 active negotiation tables in more than 500 communities and involving nearly 1 million Indigenous people to support Indigenous peoples realizing their vision of self-determination. We put into law an act respecting First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children, youth, and families so that Indigenous people could have their own system of child welfare. In 2019, we made law the Indigenous Languages Act, which provides long-term stable funding to preserve, promote, and revitalize Indigenous languages in Canada. In 2016, we endorsed the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and on June 21st, 2021, Bill C-15 received royal assent. This act will provide a roadmap for the government and Indigenous peoples to work together to fully implement the declaration. We passed legislation to make September 30th a federal statutory holiday called National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. We also updated the Canadian Citizenship Oath to include Indigenous peoples. To quote my colleague, the Honourable Marco Mendicino, Minister of Immigration, Canada's Oath of Citizenship is a commitment to this country, and that includes the National Project of Reconciliation. This new oath now includes Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis rights and will help new Canadians better understand the role of Indigenous peoples, the ongoing impact of colonialism in residential schools, and our collective obligation to uphold the treaties. This is an important step on our shared journey of reconciliation. Indeed, to date, more than 80% of the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission are complete or well underway. And finally, we've lifted over 100 boil water advisories. Where boil water advisories persist, we have a team in place to come up with plans to lift them. These are but some of the measures we've taken to continue to improve the relationship of the Government of Canada with Indigenous peoples. This journey is a long one, but it is one to which the Liberals are firmly committed. As a Catholic, I feel at home in the Liberal approach. I hope other Catholics can feel the same way.
As a Catholic school board trustee, this question weighs heavily on my mind. We must do everything that we can to move reconciliation forward as quickly as possible. And some of this includes basic respect. We had a school where in Ontario, we were asked to put our flags back up to full mast. And in residential school survivor reached out to me saying, this feels like a slap in the face. Can you bring them back down to half mast? So I worked to bring the flags back down to half mast to show respect to those navigating the terrible effects of the residential school system on them. As far as the NDP, in partnership with Indigenous people, a new Democratic government will fully implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, as well as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action. We will implement these immediately and without delay. We are far past the time to get this done, and the reconciliation and moving the TRC's Commission's 94 calls to action has not happened at a pace that I would call acceptable. We must move much quicker and in partnership with Indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples have lived with the impact and legacy of colonialism for decades. The resilience in the face of genocide is why Indigenous people, language, and culture survive. Canadians are reckoning with the theft of children from families and land from Indigenous communities. New Democrats are committed to undertaking the important work of reconciliation in good faith and in true and equal partnership with Indigenous communities across the country. We believe that the Crown's relationship to Indigenous peoples must be based on an acknowledgement of our country's colonial history of genocide and stolen lands, and include legally binding commitments to fair and equitable redress going forward. We have commitments that reflect the Truth and Reconciliation Commitment's 94 calls to action, covering child welfare, education, language and culture, healthcare, justice, equity, housing, the environment, and access to fresh water for Indigenous communities. As part of reconciliation, it's fully acknowledging the horror and harm caused to Indigenous people, their families, and communities by the residential school system. These institutions systematically remove children from their families and inflicted abuse, sickness, and death. The recent revelations of thousands of mass and unmarked graves at residential school sites across the country underlines the depth and horror that this genocidal policy inflicted for more than 160 years. It's time to find every child and bring them home. A new Democratic government will fully fund the search for graves at former residential schools, as well as the maintenance, commemoration, reburial, and protection of residential school cemeteries, according to the wishes of Indigenous families and survivors. We'll also work with nations and survivors to establish memorials to those lost to residential schools. Thank you.
Question 3 is on an economy at the service of people. In the words of Pope Francis, money is meant to serve, not rule. This statement puts simply the Catholic belief that our economy must be at the service of people, especially the most vulnerable and economically fragile among us, and not for the sake of accumulating wealth, particularly at the physical, emotional, and monetary expense of others. For many Canadians, particularly younger Canadians, a living wage and dignified work which supports a family and a dignified home are beyond reach. The result is that many are unjustly excluded from full participation in our society. What does your party propose to do to ensure that those most excluded in our economy have the opportunity to enjoy the great material prosperity of modern economic life? And how does your party propose to build an economy at the service of Canadians?
Earlier, I quoted a paragraph from Centesimus Annus by St. John Paul II, which I think well describes the role of government in creating an economy at the service of all. The state should seek to advance the common good through both direct and indirect action, taking into consideration solidarity and subsidiarity. Indirectly, and according to the principle of subsidiarity, by creating favorable conditions for the free exercise of economic activity, which will lead to abundant opportunities for employment and sources of wealth. Directly, and according to the principle of solidarity, by defending the weakest, by placing certain limits on the autonomy of the parties who determine working conditions, and by ensuring in every case the necessary minimum support for the unemployed worker. I believe that the modern Conservative Party is unique in understanding the balance that is required between indirect and direct state action. We need a strong economy, and wealth must be created before it can be redistributed. But we are also proposing a suite of new policy measures to stimulate the economy and protect the rights of workers. Conservatives will require large federally regulated companies to include worker representation on their boards of directors and reform federal bankruptcy laws so that in the event of corporate bankruptcy, pensioners will receive support ahead of investors. This is part of a series of pro-worker policies that seek to enhance the security and decision-making power of workers in the Canadian economy. Conservatives will double the Canada Workers' Benefit and double the Disability Supplement. We will increase the EI sickness benefit up to 52 weeks. Now, when we think about how an economy works for all, we also have to think about those suffering injustice overseas. We see the continuing use of slave labor in other parts of the world, which increasingly makes its way into our supply chains. Products made through forced labor by Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims in China, for example, are being sold into Canada. Despite announcing a new policy on this, the Liberal government has yet to stop a single shipment. Fighting slave labor is about justice for victims and also about fairness for Canadian workers. Conservatives have committed to tough new supply chain regulation to stop the importation of products made through slave labor. Finally, one of the biggest challenges confronting many Canadians in terms of affordability is around the affordability of a home. Housing prices have gone up so dramatically as to really exacerbate inequality and put home ownership out of the hands of many Canadians. Clearly, no effective action has been taken on this in the last 6 years. To arrest this crisis in housing affordability, we will act to dramatically increase the supply of homes, making housing more affordable at lower prices to more people. Affordability is driven by supply and demand, but supply shortages have kept pushing prices up. We have a plan to build 1 million homes in the next 3 years through measures such as leveraging federal infrastructure investments to increase housing supply, releasing federal lands for housing construction, and creating new incentives for investors to build rental housing. We will also fight money laundering in the real estate sector and ban foreign investors not living in or moving to Canada from buying homes here. These and other measures, available at conservative.ca/plan, will help build an economy that works for all.
Liberals have long believed that society should be inclusive and fair so that everyone has an opportunity to realize their full potential. That means paying attention to how we structure our society to make certain that we are not creating barriers that would discourage or exclude some Canadians from participating. Frankly, Liberals believe that we all benefit when everyone has a valued place in society, culture, and the economy. We succeed as a nation when each Canadian succeeds. We succeed as people when each of us feels secure, loved, listened to, and included. Indeed, it's creating that sense of belonging that makes us strong. To this end, Liberals have enacted many measures since we formed government in 2015 to further this inclusive, fair, and welcoming vision of Canada. As I mentioned in the previous bit, we introduced the Canada Child Benefit, and we also made a $72 billion commitment to a national housing strategy. We've supported education and skills training for youth and adult Canadians so that they can get well-paying jobs. As I mentioned, we are mindful of not creating new barriers when we enact new policies. So that has meant examining the budget through a gender lens to make sure that women are receiving equal treatment. However, avoiding creating new barriers isn't enough. To have a truly fair society in which everyone can participate and realize their potential, we must remove barriers to participation where they exist. That's why we've struck a blue ribbon task force to take on a much needed review of the Employment Equity Act, its first in 25 years. This task force will come up with recommendations to help remove barriers so that the most vulnerable will have an opportunity to succeed in the workplace. As well, We are working to open people's minds to eliminate racism and discrimination through an anti-racism strategy and the creation of an anti-racism secretariat. Ableism is a major barrier to participation in the job market and the economy, so we have undertaken a thorough review of the disability benefits to find ways to ensure that all Canadians have a fair chance to participate in our society, culture, economy, and public life. In terms of fair compensation for work, as mentioned, we provided $3 billion wage top-ups to provinces and territories. We've implemented a $15 federal minimum wage. We've implemented a number of job training programs to encourage the participation of groups that often face barriers, such as Indigenous peoples, LGBTQ2, women, Black, and other racialized groups. We've invested $350 million to support charities who are doing amazing work across this country. To me, this approach is strongly in line with gospel values. We are our brothers and sisters' keepers. We also believe in the gifts and talents of each and every person. We can tap into these gifts and talents and provide opportunities for development of those gifts and talents. And when we do that, we all benefit. One of the greatest gifts a person can experience is to provide the fertile soil for growth and development. When we foster flourishing, growth, and development in each other, we are doubly blessed. We see the person full of light, and we see others benefiting from that person's human flourishing. This brings both prosperity and peace. What a beautiful combination.
Yeah, so this is a particularly great question in context of the pandemic we just went through. The pandemic changed the way many of us had to work, and overnight, millions of jobs disappeared. So the NDP in the minority government worked with the government to bring in support. So we doubled the amount of the CERB payments so that people could survive as they worked towards rejoining the economy in a way that works for everyone. We also increased payroll benefits to cover 75% of a person's wage. So that was another thing the NDP fought for in this government. And when you elect NDP members, we will fight for you in Parliament. The growth of low-paid, insecure work, we need to do more to support gig workers and make sure that short-term precarious work isn't really kind of where people find themselves when they rejoin the job market. We are working people, New Democrats are. For our whole history, we've fought for better working conditions and standards that lift everyone up. We know good jobs that treat people fairly make a real difference to Canadian families, and that setting up Canadians for success in the work world benefits us all. We know the federal government has an important role to play in making work better and fairer and more secure for everyone. We must do so much more to protect the health, safety, and rights of all workers in Canada. And the NDP have always supported and will continue to support workers coming together into unions so that they can build better conditions for themselves and a better life, and a life that pays a living wage for workers so that you can live and you can thrive in Canada. Thank you.
Question 4 is on care for God's creation. As Catholics, we believe that humanity's relationship with creation and the creatures of the earth is a sacred trust from God. Pope Francis has been clear that while we are meant to work with creation in serving with God as co-creators, the sinful exploitation of our natural world and resulting ecological crises like climate change threaten the existence of the human family. It seems too often that as a culture, we put our own immediate material wants before the well-being of others, including those in other parts of the world and all future generations. Living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue, says Pope Francis. It is not an optional or secondary aspect of our Christian experience. How does your political party propose to achieve an ecologically sustainable future for Canada to protect the God-given dignity of coming generations and our fellow children of God around the world?
Well, thank you. And I've particularly appreciated and learned from Pope Francis's work on this issue. I was struck by how Laudato Si, his signature encyclical on this question, highlights personal responsibility and personal sacrifice as being necessary elements of the work that is required confronting the serious environmental challenges that we face. I think many Canadians have been frustrated to see leaders preach one set of principles on the environment and then fail to practice them. Now, Conservatives have a strong and effective environmental plan, which independent experts have said achieves the same greenhouse gas emissions reductions as other plans. I think our plan also does a better job of integrating concerns for both the environment and for building an economy that works for all. Our full plan is available online, but I wanted to use this opportunity to highlight three distinctions between our plan and the government plan. They are border adjustments, carbon savings accounts, and tackling unsafe plastic disposal. So border adjustments. The Liberal approach to climate change has imposed costs and regulatory requirements on Canadian companies, but failed to put the same requirements on foreign companies that sell their products into the Canadian market. This doesn't make any sense. Why allow Chinese companies, for example, to sell products to Canada which have lower environmental standards in production without some kind of added price to offset the advantage that they enjoy over Canadian producers as a result? Conservatives recognize that climate change is a global problem, and that pushing companies to operate outside our border hurts our economy without helping the environment. So the Conservative plan commits to introducing costs for foreign companies at the point of importation of products to Canada that align with the costs that are imposed on Canadian industry. This will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also reduce the incentive for companies to move their operations overseas. Carbon savings accounts. One of the biggest challenges for individuals seeking to reduce their environmental footprint is the cost of adaptation. Making it more expensive to heat your home doesn't do any good if you can't actually afford the retrofit that would allow you to reduce energy consumption. The Conservative plan proposes to give all of the money collected through a point of sale carbon price back to individuals who pay it in order to use for adaptation. Our plan achieves the same greenhouse gas emissions reductions even while lowering gas prices because it actually gives individuals the resources they need to fund adaptation. And tackling unsafe plastic disposal. How do we confront the serious challenge of ocean plastic pollution? Since most ocean plastic waste comes from a small number of developing countries, we can best tackle plastic waste by prohibiting its export and promoting plastic recycling and reuse, and by working with developing countries to apply new repurposing technology. In the last Parliament, Conservatives started this process by putting forward a private member's bill prohibiting the export of plastic waste. However, the bill was opposed by the governing Liberals. While talking about limiting single-use plastics, Liberals are still in favor of permitting the export of plastic waste to countries which are not well positioned to recycle it. So this has to change as well.
As a Liberal and as a Catholic concerned with the human stewardship of the earth, I'm very proud of the Liberal record on the environment and climate change. Since we were elected, we have been guided by the idea that a healthy, sustainable economy goes hand in hand with increased economic prosperity. And we have been guided by the strong belief that investments in preserving our environment are investments in our future. In fact, we've invested over $100 billion in sustainability measures since we formed government. We recognize that climate change is real, and we agree with the scientific community that activities of human beings play a very significant part in global warming. As such, we have put a price on pollution. Although it seems like a long time ago, it was Canada, through the advocacy of my colleague, the Honourable Catherine McKenna, the then Minister of Environment and Climate Change, who rallied the attendees at the Paris Conference on the Environment and got everyone to agree to an ambitious 2-degree target. Indeed, we've set some of the world's most ambitious targets for reducing emissions and carbon pollution in the fight against global warming. We've set a new ambitious target of 40 to 45% below the 2005 levels by 2030 and implemented legislation that keeps us accountable. We've introduced an $8 billion net zero accelerator fund. And in fact, in Hamilton, my hometown, we've announced a $400 million investment into ArcelorMittal Dofasco to produce green steel. This project alone will be equivalent to removing 900,000 cars off the road. We are also offering $5,000 in grants for home retrofits, investing $4.4 billion to help homeowners and landlords complete deep energy retrofits with interest-free loans up to $40,000. We are investing $25 billion into public transit, 5,000 incentives for purchase of electric vehicles. We announced a requirement that 100% of the vehicles sold in Canada must be zero emissions by 2035. We have a goal of protecting a quarter of our lands and a quarter of our oceans by 2025, a commitment to build 2 billion trees, banning of single-use plastics. Look, the list goes on and on. So we are taking strong action. We know strong action needs to be taken, and we are committed to doing that. Our Liberal government believes strongly that Canadians should continue to take these strong actions and that for us to meet our targets, this full commitment is important, and we are committing to it. I personally believe that this is a divine responsibility, given that stewardship of the earth was entrusted to us by God.
Yeah, so I'm inspired every day by Pope Francis's Laudato encyclical called Laudato Si on care for our common home. Um, this talks about caring for our one planet and just caring about our brothers in it as they suffer through things like resource extraction without any sort of kind of supports and being taken advantage of. So I'm a firm believer in Laudato Si and its key messages. I've ensured that Pope Francis's vision for a world where we care for the planet and each other are ingrained in all the work we do at the Toronto Catholic District School Board, working towards Laudato Si schools with DevPeace, an excellent Catholic social justice organization. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have time when it comes to climate change. It is a crisis, and it is a crisis right now. Under the previous Liberal government, emissions continue to increase, and we find ourselves alone amongst the G7 countries in this dubious accomplishment. This government has bought a pipeline and states that revenues from the pipeline will help fight climate change. Pipelines are not how you fight climate change. The NDP will target getting down to 50% of 2005 emissions levels by 2030. We will do this by immediately stopping the Trans Mountain pipeline work and ending subsidies to oil and gas corporations. We will support a transition away from oil and gas for workers so that they can get hired to do clean energy jobs. We'll enshrine the right to a healthy environment in a Canadian Environmental Bill of Rights. We'll set a target to power Canada with net zero energy by 2030. We will ban single-use plastics the same way that we've done that at the Toronto Catholic District School Board. We'll aggressively move transit and active transportation projects forward to give people an alternative to driving a car and commuting to work. And we'll ensure that Indigenous people, as the original peoples and stewards of their territories, will ensure they have a seat at high-level decision-making tables to help direct Canada's efforts to confront the climate crisis. Thank you.
Question 5 is on rights, responsibilities, and participation in society. Catholic social teaching recognizes a wide range of rights inherently owed to every person in respect of their dignity as a child of God. The Church also teaches that human rights are indissolubly linked to human duties. In this way, working towards the common good of all is a responsibility for each and every one of us and every institution in Canadian society. In that spirit, how does your party propose to encourage and enable the great breadth of civil society in Canada to employ their time, talents, and treasure in the service of the common good and in full partnership with governments, business corporations, and cultural institutions in order to promote the full participation of every Canadian in our society?
There is a vital need for concerted action across different social institutions to revivify community ties, and government has an important role to play in that work. At one time, of course, most healthcare, education, and other mechanisms of support were provided by faith-based and other private organizations. Government got involved in understandable hope of ensuring universal access and universal provision. But governments involved in these areas could have done a better job of fostering partnership with existing institutions. Partnerships between the public sector and the private not-for-profit sector leverage both the public commitment to universal access and the ability of private organizations to leverage the voluntary involvement and goodwill of everyday citizens. These partnerships also facilitate innovation. Government bureaucracies tend towards uniformity, while private not-for-profit organizations can offer personalized and innovative approaches. Still today, many churches and other not-for-profit organizations are interested in partnering with government on healthcare, on combating the opioid crisis, on creating opportunities for the most vulnerable, on housing, and on many other issues. But there are two things that are holding back the possibility of greater partnership in these areas. One is red tape, and the other is a lack of respect for the consciences and values of those involved in this private work. On the red tape issue, I'd like to share the example of private refugee sponsorship. Catholic and other organizations partner with the government through private refugee sponsorship, with the government reviewing and approving applications and private organizations identifying and supporting refugees for their first year. Data shows that privately sponsored refugees do much better than publicly sponsored refugees because they come into existing communities of love and support. This is a clear case example of the benefits associated with partnership between private not-for-profit actors and public institutions. But in recent years, many private refugee sponsors have raised concerns about the layering on of new additional red tape, as well as the arbitrary capping of the number of privately sponsored refugees that can come in. This policy of adding needless administrative burdens on community groups is something that we will end. Bureaucracies naturally tend towards expansion, but we need leaders who understand the importance of keeping bureaucracies in check. Now, the other challenge confronting organizations who want to partner with government is a lack of respect for their conscience and values. The Liberal government recently tried to bring in a values test for the Canada Summer Jobs Program, requiring any organization receiving funding from the government to check a box indicating their agreement with particular positions of the Liberal Party that actually had nothing to do with the jobs involved. These kinds of values tests are part of a larger problem. Many organizations are interested in cooperating with the government on the delivery of social services, but will not do so at the expense of their values. Another example, we need to see the expansion of hospice and palliative care in this country, but that isn't going to happen if we don't respect the conscience and values of those who work in this area.
Stewarding a civil society has long been a key component of Liberal policy. Since 2015, we've put in place many measures and made many commitments that are meant to help further civil society in Canada and abroad. We have empowered organizations like the YWCA, the Red Cross, and shelters across Canada to create programs that will in turn empower women to be independent, become entrepreneurs, and escape situations of domestic violence. Equal participation in the world of work is an important way that many people find fulfillment and contribute to civil society. Making sure that everyone has a fair chance at success in the workplace is a key Liberal priority. That is why, for example, we introduced a commitment to provide $10 a day early learning and childcare spaces and $5 billion to establish a women entrepreneurship fund. We have implemented anti-harassment and violence legislation in the workplace to help Canadians feel safe and secure in federally regulated workplaces. We've also worked with provinces and territories to advance steps towards the ratification of ILO Convention 190, an international treaty to recognize the right of everyone to the world of work, free from violence and harassment, including gender-based violence and harassment. We believe that women and men in federally regulated workplaces should get equal pay for work of equal value. So we passed the Pay Equity Act, which went into effect on August 31st, 2021. We created the Black Entrepreneurship Loan Fund in partnership between the Government of Canada, Black-led business organizations, and several financial institutions. This fund provides loans up to $250,000 to Black business owners and entrepreneurs across this country. We also established Accessible Canada Act to create a barrier-free Canada for people with disabilities. We are helping young people gain experience and opportunities while making contributions in their communities by expanding the youth employment strategy and investing in Canada Summer Jobs, through which over 120,000 positions were created in 2021 alone. We have addressed the specific challenges faced by Black Canadian youth by investing $9 million in community supports for Black Canadian youth, which enables groups like Hamilton Centre for Civic Inclusion to create programming that helps support Black youth. And finally, we've acted on the question of food security. In April 2020, we announced $100 million through the Emergency Food Security Fund to help Canadian food banks and other national food rescue organizations improve access to food for people experiencing food insecurity in Canada due to the COVID-19 pandemic. There are a selection of many ways our Liberal government has worked to encourage greater participation and inclusivity in civil society. They are grounded in a fundamental belief in the essential dignity of the human person and their right to equal participation in society. I feel that these resonate strongly with my Catholic faith and strong sense of personal duty to my fellow humans.
On this question, I'm inspired by Pope Francis's latest encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, in which fraternity and social friendship are the ways that His Holiness indicates to build a better, more just and peaceful world with the contribution of all people and institutions towards that goal. I think as leaders, we must encourage behavior that recognizes the tenets behind Fratelli Tutti, from encouraging wealthy Canadians to pay their fair share to support society via a wealth tax on those who make $10 million or more, and ensuring that corporations that profit here return supports to ordinary Canadians. We are all in this together, and we can support the marginalized by the NDP plan to support the marginalized by introducing a wealth tax and ensuring that corporations who profit here pay their fair share. We must also address the root causes of unemployment and ensure that employment insurance supports people being able to afford to live, as well as get trained to contribute to society in a way that is meaningful to them. We must also address racism and hate as a society as well. Countering hate online is an important part of the NDP platform. We will also work to tackle systemic racism and its negative effects on minorities, ensuring that minorities have an equitable experience in Canadian society. We truly have to work with each and every institution in Canada to eliminate systemic racism that is unfortunately in every institution and in every system. That's why it's called systemic racism. Canadians must become more like the Good Samaritan to ensure that we all recover from this pandemic, and the NDP will support and encourage society to support each other. Thank you.
Question 6 is on solidarity. Solidarity is acceptance of the truth that because all people are part of the same human family, part of the one body of Christ, what happens to others affects us as well, regardless of differences in location or life circumstances. Solidarity is found in a commitment to the good of one's neighbor. The good of one is the good of all, and the other is as important as the self. Injustice done to another is an injustice that affects everyone, and Catholics stand in solidarity with the unique injustices and sufferings facing so many Canadians, whether our Indigenous communities, our poorest neighbors, immigrants and refugees escaping persecution abroad, those living in isolated communities, those living with the ongoing mental health and addictions consequences of the pandemic, and the young, including young families, and the extraordinary challenges to human dignity they all face. How does your party plan to concretely express solidarity in partnership with other social, economic, and cultural institutions with Canada's most vulnerable people?
In addition to taking indirect action, such as establishing the conditions for employment and opportunity and expanding partnerships with faith-based and other not-for-profit organizations, direct action is required by government. Our platform, available at conservative.ca/plan, offers strong and serious proposals for direct government action aimed at helping the most vulnerable. Particularly vulnerable groups of Canadians include those facing homelessness and addictions. Conservatives will re-implement the housing first approach to homelessness, make recovery the overarching goal of substance abuse policy, and create 1,000 new residential drug treatment beds and 50 new recovery community centers. By emphasizing and investing in recovery, Conservatives will seek to end the opioid crisis instead of just managing it. Our platform puts a major emphasis on mental health. During this pandemic, there has been an increase in the number of people struggling with mental health challenges, and yet the government chose this, the absolute worst time, to pass a law allowing those facing mental health challenges to actually receive suicide facilitation from the medical system. Those struggling from depression and other mental health challenges should be offered support for recovery, not suicide facilitation. Conservatives will reverse this liberal law and bring in other proactive measures to assist those suffering from mental health challenges. Our Canada Mental Health Action Plan will seek partnership with the provinces to provide stable, predictable funding to allow an additional 1 million Canadians to receive mental health treatment every year. We will encourage employers to add mental health coverage to their employee benefits plans by offering a tax credit for 25% of the cost of additional mental health coverage for the first 3 years. We will also provide support to charities and not-for-profit organizations working in mental health and create a national 3-digit suicide prevention hotline. For Canadians living with disabilities, we will double disability support in the Canada Workers Benefit, boost funding for accessibility, and make it easier to qualify for the disability tax credit and registered disability savings plan. Finally, I'd like to share a little bit about our plan to help those most vulnerable who are living beyond our borders. The Conservative International Development Policy commits to maintaining existing levels of international development, but also brings in proactive reforms to actually deliver more assistance to the most vulnerable. One way that we will do this is by reforming onerous direction and control regulations. These regulations require development projects overseas to be directly controlled by Canadian organizations if the Canadian funding partner is to maintain its charitable status. These rules are outdated, promote colonial approaches to development which deny community-based control, and impose additional requirements in terms of red tape. Reforming these regulations would unlock millions of new dollars to help the most vulnerable. Conservatives will also reopen Canada's Office of Religious Freedom, started under the last Conservative government but closed by the Liberals. This office will help Canada re-engage with supporting the most vulnerable victims of persecution around the world.
Human dignity is the foundation of the Liberal approach to government. Solidarity is the foundation of the protection of human dignity, because it means understanding that the good of another is indeed intrinsically linked to our personal good and the good of society. As such, our Liberal government has put in place many measures to enhance solidarity. We enhanced legislation to help further combat forced labor from Canadian supply chains. We have a policy of taking refugees and supporting them as they integrate into Canadian society. We will continue to facilitate safe passage and resettlement of Afghan citizens, and will increase the number of eligible refugees from 20,000 to 40,000. We will expand the new immigration stream for human rights defenders and work with civil society groups to ensure safe passage and resettlement of people under threat, including from Afghanistan. Mental health is a key element of social solidarity. Since 2015, our government has given $5 billion to provinces and territories to increase the availability of mental health care. We are committed to permanent, ongoing funding for mental health services under the Canada Mental Health Transfer, with an initial investment of $4.5 billion over 5 years. We are also committed to co-developing and continuing to invest in distinction-based mental health and wellness strategy that meets the deep and unique needs of all First Nations to address the ongoing impacts of colonialization and residential schools. We created Canada's National Housing Strategy, a 10-year plan to invest over $72 billion to build, supply, and make housing more affordable and address chronic homelessness. And we've tripled the federal government's investment in homelessness prevention and reduction. We launched the Rapid Housing Initiative, investing $2.5 billion to create at least 9,200 new units of affordable housing across Canada. We declared trans rights as human rights and passed legislation to fully protect gender identity and expression. We introduced legislation to protect the dignity and equality of LGBTQ2 people by criminalizing conversion therapy. We will reintroduce that legislation within 100 days in office. As well, we launched the Gender-Based Violence Strategy, committing nearly $200 million starting in 2017-18 until 2022-23, and over $40 million per year ongoing. In 2021, we committed $601.3 million towards a national action plan to end gender-based violence. And if re-elected, we're going to continue to move forward with this. Helping vulnerable people around the world through the Feminist International Assistance Policy, we have made historic investments to improve the lives of women, girls, and vulnerable populations. Our proposal is to increase Canada's international development assistance every year towards 2030 to realize the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are some of the measures we have put in place and the commitments we have made to increase solidarity both in Canada and abroad. To me, these are policies that are in line with the Catholic approach to personal, national, and international solidarity.
So this takes me back again to Pope Francis's Fratelli Tutti for inspiration. We truly must work together to support the marginalized here in Canada. Unfortunately, we've gone through decades of government cuts that have harmed the services we count on, and Canadians have been left struggling. They can't access healthcare, medication, mental health care, or home care that they or their loved ones need. Millions of Canadians are living in poverty and homelessness, and too many of them are living with disabilities, including seniors, veterans, and children. New Democrats believe that we all benefit when we live longer, healthier lives together, and we're committed to a future where we take better care of each other, so everyone benefits. We'll invest in healthcare and expand it to include pharmacare that covers everyone, and work towards expanding it even further, including dental care, vision care, and mental health care. We'll tackle homelessness, as housing is a human right. We'll fight poverty, and we'll work to make sure that everyone has access to healthy, affordable food. That starts in schools with a federal student nutrition program, because hungry students can't learn. We have to make sure that everyone has the basics of life so that they can move forward and thrive as part of society. We know we're stronger together, we do better together, and we can work together to make life better for everyone. Housing is a human right. People living in encampments are expressing that human right, and we must start building housing that works for them in partnership with them. And here I will acknowledge the church's excellent role in helping to support the homeless through their Out of the Cold programs and other programs. The NDP will support that great work by building 500,000 affordable homes, with 250,000 of them built within the next 5 years. We'll work with co-ops and land trusts so that we are building housing by the people and for the people. We'll support renters who pay more than 30% of their monthly income towards rent with a subsidy of up to $5,000 so that vulnerable renters don't fall through the cracks. We do want to also take action on the opioid emergency that is gripping all of Canada by ensuring that people have safe access to drugs in an environment where they can be supported and work towards recovery together.
Question 7 is on Canadian culture. The importance of local, regional, and national cultures cannot be overemphasized as means of balancing our senses of solidarity with desires for freedom of self-expression. Pope Francis has recently noted that while we are called to welcome the presence and positive influence among us of people from other cultures, the solution to our own local cultural problems is not to spurn the richness of our own cultures. Pope Francis writes, just as there can be no dialogue with other without a sense of our own identity, so there can be no openness between peoples except on the basis of love for one's own land, one's own people, one's own cultural roots. I cannot truly encounter another unless I stand on firm foundations, for it is on the basis of these that I can accept the gift the other brings, and in turn offer an authentic gift of my own. I can welcome others who are different and value the unique contribution they have to make, only if I am firmly rooted in my own people and culture. What do Canadian culture and identity mean to your party? Are all relevant voices in Canada invited to participate in shaping Canadian culture? And if not, how would your party propose to address the building of Canadian identity in conjunction with other governments and with other social, cultural, and economic institutions?
The love of the universal is indeed grounded in the love of the particular. We have an obligation to love and serve those in our immediate surroundings, and that is the basis on which a love for all humanity is built. Since the beginning, Canada's culture has been defined by an embrace of religious, ethnic, and linguistic diversity. We were founded through a pact predominantly between English-speaking Protestants and French-speaking Catholics. And this embrace of diversity has expanded to include greater recognition of Indigenous peoples who were already here and the welcoming of new communities from other ethnic, religious, and linguistic backgrounds. Of course, diversity in itself is not enough. There are many very diverse countries which are characterized by conflicts between different groups. What has made Canada work well is a long-standing commitment to peaceful pluralism, to the idea that people with a range of different experiences and perspectives can fully live out their identities while also coming together in one nation characterized by common political values. Further, we have contended that this diversity, facilitated by peaceful pluralism, allows us to do better together by drawing from the ideas and experiences of different peoples, different cultures, and different traditions. Our diversity also strengthens our ability to engage in the world, because our own domestic diversity facilitates connections with a broader range of peoples and nations. This is the dream of a strong multicultural Canada, founded on a commitment to peaceful pluralism and to freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, facilitating the kind of personal and national growth that happens when we can draw on the full range of human knowledge and experience. There are also threats to this reality. Escalating instances of violent extremism, including violence targeting individuals and groups on the basis of their identity, are fraying national harmony. Doctrines of collective guilt, which seek to blame whole groups of people for the actions of some of their members, inevitably create division. Our refusal to dialogue with others and efforts to limit freedom of speech, such as the Internet Censorship Bill C-10, undermine the functioning of a healthy democratic pluralism. To build a healthy Canadian identity, governments should forcefully condemn all instances of violence, should clearly criminalize incitement to violence, and should defend the rights of all to participate in the public square. As we reflect on our culture, it is important to remember the lessons of the past and learn from them, while recognizing how the efforts of our ancestors established the ground on which this great country has been built. Conservatives will create a new Canadian Heritage Preservation Fund to repair and restore historical monuments, statues, and heritage buildings. There is such a thing as common Canadian values, and those are political values rooted in how our politics and our public square should function. We resolve our disagreements through dialogue, we protect the rights of others to have different opinions, and we defend the ability of all to participate in that shared conversation, regardless of their background or starting points.
Canada has been a diverse society since its very beginning. Our country has always been a place where people had to work hard together as allies, friends, even when they were rivals. Our climate is harsh for much of the year, and surviving here requires recognizing the value of people different to ourselves. If you think about it, the cardinal values of tolerance, inclusion, and respect for others are what enabled original French and English settlers to survive. They had to work with and sometimes fight alongside Indigenous peoples. As our country grew and attracted settlers from new places from around the globe, we became more diverse. We recognize that diversity is our strength because working together in mutual respect meant that we could face challenges that thriving in our cold and rugged land presented to us. The Liberal Party has been a central figure in Canada's successful strategy of recognizing diversity as a strength. Historically, we have funded the national cultural institutions such as the National Film Board or the CBC, which has helped use modern media to create common cultural threads that bind our country together. Going forward, we propose to continue to bring Canadians together in our extraordinary diversity by strengthening our national culture of tolerance, mutual respect, and recognition of differences. Liberals recognize that gaining mutual understanding happens when people listen attentively to one another. The journey of listening, sharing, and responding is truly the human career. We have a much better understanding of the other when we journey with the other. We will continue to invest in the cultural institutions that help bind those threads into the beautiful, colorful tapestry that is Canada of today and will be the Canada of tomorrow.
I believe that Canadians aspire to be part of a great country whose global contributions and local contributions they can be proud of. I think in order to achieve that and in order to move forward, we must first address the sins of our past. And we do that by advancing reconciliation with First Nations people as quickly as possible in partnership with them, and do everything in our power to eliminate systemic racism in our institutions. We must start to focus on leading with equity. We have to look at our tables and ask ourselves, whose voices aren't at the table? That includes Indigenous people. That includes, making sure that our consultations are trauma-informed consultations, and we bring those most affected by our previous policies to the table to build policies that work better for them. Bringing our LGBTQ2S+ communities to the table as well, and ensure that we update the Employment Act to include things like gender identity and other sort of human rights that we find in other codes, but not necessarily in the Employment Act. And, we have to move to end employment discrimination faced by members of the LGBTQ2S+ community. A new Democratic government will add sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression to the Employment Equity Act in order to address the disadvantages experienced by the LGBTQ2+ communities, and particularly transgender people, to finding work. Another area that we can advance to really make Canada an equitable place we can all be proud of is addressing gender equity. Our communities and our country are stronger when women thrive. In Canada, it's still too common for women to experience discrimination and gender-based violence, particularly if they're members of a marginalized community. And unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has just made these things worse, and women need support. We want to build childcare back immediately so that the recovery is also a she-covery. We want to ensure that women can return to their careers and build back better with equity, but immediately. So we need to have those childcare spaces available right away so that we can rebuild our workforce in a way that is equitable from a gender perspective.
We're closing our forum now with closing statements from the candidates on the following question. What is most attractive for Catholics in voting for your party in this election?
Well, thank you again for the opportunity to participate in this important forum. Conversations like this reflect the value of people of faith engaging in dialogue with political leaders. I believe the church and state should be structurally separate, but they are also often working towards similar goals. Catholics should become engaged with the Conservative Party for 3 reasons. First, as I have sought to argue, the modern Conservative Party's commitment to integrating both solidarity and subsidiarity is more aligned with Catholic social teaching than the approach of any other party. Our approach to solidarity includes strong new policies to defend human rights beyond our borders and a commitment to looking out for the most vulnerable here at home. We are also seized with the importance of solidarity with the next generation. How we manage our public finances and the effectiveness of our environmental policies will shape the kind of country we pass on to the next generation. Solidarity with those who we can see and with those who we cannot see. Solidarity with those who have been born and with those who have yet to be born. And also subsidiarity. Our approach to politics recognizes the value of strong families and communities as the cornerstone of a good society. We recognize that freedom is the basis for reflection, dialogue, and national growth. And we seek partnerships between government and civil society that advance the common good, facilitated through the removal of red tape and the protection of conscience. Our commitment to the integration of solidarity and subsidiarity is the first reason why the Conservative Party should be the preferred choice of Catholics. Secondly, the Conservative Party is the only major party within which a Catholic who is fully committed to the teachings of the Church is able to fully participate. If you're a Catholic who believes in the inherent dignity of life at all stages, who wants to fight homelessness, protect the environment, support international development, and increase supports for those with disabilities, you are welcome in the Conservative Party. However, if you wish to run as a candidate for any other party with those same set of values, then you would be disqualified from running on the basis of your convictions about life. Now, thirdly, Conservatives are the only party that is seeking a constructive relationship with the Catholic community. We are the only party to speak out consistently against violence and vandalism targeting the Catholic community, and defend the ability of Catholic entities to partner with government while maintaining their values. We have sought constructive engagement to advance shared goals on reconciliation rather than pointing fingers to avoid taking responsibility. We have seen escalating anti-Catholic rhetoric coming from the other major parties. We have spoken out against that as well. Catholics in Canada have done so much to strengthen our country. Canada needs your prayers and your active involvement in the political process now more than ever. Thank you, and God bless.
I am someone who has led a life guided by faith and the divine. I'm a member of the Liberal Party because I felt a call to serve, a call to do something for society and for my fellow Canadians. To me, the Liberal approach to government is fundamentally close to the Catholic ideal of embracing gospel values of love and compassion. Those values have led us to put in place programs that benefit all Canadians, such as the Canada Child Benefit and the National Child Care Strategy. These are supports for children, for women, and for families. We've supported seniors and are working to ensure that health care that they receive is up to the standard that they deserve. The supports that I have mentioned in responses thus far are all examples of the types of supports that we have put in place because we fundamentally believe that a just society leaves no one behind. We very quickly rose to the occasion when the pandemic struck to ensure that no Canadian was left behind during COVID-19. We provided support so Canadians could put food on the table and pay rent, and we did this in an unprecedented time frame. We focused on the health and safety of Canadians. We procured millions of vaccines to keep Canadians safe. We put in place measures to remove barriers to participation in the labor market, entrepreneurship, education, and government so that everyone could have a fair chance to succeed. We created a comprehensive housing plan to make sure that everyone has a fair chance of owning a home or renting at a reasonable rent. Indeed, Catholics can be confident in voting for the Liberal government. We are putting forward a platform for human flourishing that will continue to help support children and families, a plan to build a sustainable economy by stewarding our environment, including everyone to build a cleaner, more prosperous future, a national housing strategy that will take serious steps towards making secure housing more affordable for Canadians, and taking action on healthcare to ensure everyone, especially our seniors, will receive the healthcare that they need. This is putting the gospel values of love and compassion into action. It is building a society based on inclusion and hope. It is based on justice and fairness. It is based on a belief that every person should be treated with dignity, that every person has gifts and talents, and that we can work together to actualize these gifts and talents. These are the gospel values. These are the values on which I was raised. I have to say that I was blessed with two absolutely amazing parents who taught me these values. How? By living them. And I give thanks to God for this incredible gift. I wish each and every one of you who has taken the time to listen today God's greatest blessings. May good health, happiness, and peace be yours. I know these are trying times. We can all do our best to love and support one another. We are going to get through this together in faith and friendship. Thank you so much for your time.
The NDP, to me, is the party most aligned with the Catholic social justice teachings, which really have inspired me my entire life to advocate for the marginalized. The NDP has always been the party of the marginalized. Never has that focus been as important as it is now, as we work to ensure that Canadians don't slip through the cracks as we work to recover from this pandemic. As a school board trustee, every decision I made, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, who are we leaving behind with this decision? And this is how Parliament must make decisions going forward. We have to always have an eye on who we are leaving behind. And the NDP, I believe, are the party best positioned to lead with this sort of thinking. And this is actually how we have encouraged better decisions in Parliament through the minority government, with a focus on who we are leaving behind and ensuring that we don't leave them behind. As Pope Francis says, we are fratelli tutti, and we must work together to come out of this pandemic together as a society. We need to break our loaf of bread into millions of loaves of bread, and ensure that every Canadian has everything they need to survive and thrive as we work to build back better and build back quickly and with equity as we work through this pandemic. The NDP is the only party with a platform that will take care of each and every person in this country and help us recover from the dual crises of affordability and climate change. I truly hope that the NDP and I can count on your support. Thank you.